Why did the parade ground fall so silent the moment she stepped off the transport? The heat pressed down like a weight, dust clinging to the boots of 180 men who had trained together, sweated together, failed and succeeded as one unit. They knew each other's voices, footsteps, even the way each man breathed under pressure. But now every eye followed the single figure moving across the gravel, her stride steady, her chin unshaken. She didn't belong, at least not in their eyes. And that was the point. Lieutenant adjusted her duffel on one shoulder and scanned Fort Hawkins with the cool assessment of someone who had walked into hostile terrain before. She didn't flinch at the whispers rising like sparks in dry grass. Diversity points. She won't last a week. One or two smirked. Others studied her like a puzzle piece hammered into the wrong board. Only a handful held something closer to curiosity. She wasn't here for their acceptance. She wasn't here to prove anything. She was here because orders said so, because merit had carved her a slot in a program that had no patience for weakness, and because deep down in the quiet place where the past burned brighter than the sun over Texas, she knew she had unfinished business. Inside the command building, the air cooled but the welcome did not. Colonel William barely looked up from her file. A relic of another war, Vietnam etched into his posture and the hard lines around his mouth. He asked only her name, his tone flat, his glance sharp enough to slice through most officers. She gave him nothing but precision in her stance and calm in her voice. He snapped her folder shut. No handshake, no welcome, just 3 clipped sentences and dismissal. The message was clear: I didn't ask for you. Her salute was crisp, her exit silent. She had faced worse than disdain. The barracks at the far end of the row held a bed, a desk, a dented locker, and the kind of silence that left room for memory. She unpacked methodically. Uniforms, boots polished by habit, a weathered copy of The Art of War, and a photograph whose frame had been battered by deployments. Her father, Colonel James, stood in that picture with the same steel in his expression she now carried. He had been everything: mentor, model, and ghost. When she laid the photo on the desk, her tattoo burned faintly beneath her sleeve, the ink alive as always when she thought of him. An eagle diving, talons clutching arrows, numbers circling like a seal. She rubbed the edge of her shoulder. No one here would see it. Not yet. Morning at Fort Hawkins started at 4:30. Gravel trembled under the synchronized pounding of boots. Commands barked across dry air. Mac joined the run, middle of the pack, breathing even. By the 4th mile she was ahead of half the men, stride calm, sweat nothing more than proof of discipline. Sergeant Miller, the kind of man built from steel cables and suspicion, narrowed his eyes at her. Not showing off, are you, Lieutenant? She answered without a beat. Just keeping pace, Sergeant. He grunted, but the seed was planted. At the range, the rifle felt natural in her grip, the recoil an old conversation. Shot after shot landed where it should. The murmurs this time were not mocking. They were unsettled. She dismantled and rebuilt her weapon faster than the instructors, fingers moving with the familiarity of someone who had done it blindfolded, exhausted, in far less forgiving places. Miller didn't like it. Didn't comment, just watched from behind dark aviators, arms crossed, expression unreadable. By Friday, the whispers had shifted. Not acceptance, not yet, but hesitation. That afternoon, the loudspeaker crackled with an unusual order. Full uniform inspection, 1,600 hours parade ground. Soldiers grumbled. Inspections weren't surprises, and never at this hour under the merciless Texas sun. But they obeyed, pulling at collars already damp with sweat. Mac stood in formation, row straight, boots lined. Walked the line slowly, his gaze sharp, his comments minimal. A scuff here, a crooked tape there, until he stopped before her. Lieutenant, his voice carried without effort, step forward. She did, posture perfect. You've had an eventful week. Yes, sir. Let's see if you understand regulation. Remove your blouse. The words struck harder than the heat. A few heads snapped toward them. Silence stretched thick as rope. Sir, you heard me. Field regulation calls for proper layered uniform presentation. Take it off. She knew better. This wasn't about regulation. This wasn't about discipline. It was humiliation, plain and simple. The kind of theater that made the powerful feel taller when the crowd watched. Her pulse didn't change. Her breathing didn't falter. Slowly, deliberately, she unfastened each button. 1, 2, 3. A ripple ran through the ranks as she folded the blouse neatly over her arm and stood at attention in her undershirt, chin lifted. No shame, no fear. His face was still, but behind his glasses his eyes locked on her shoulder. And for the first time something cracked. His jaw tightened, his breath caught, his posture stiffened as though he had seen a ghost. The tattoo. Ink black against tan skin. The eagle in dive, talons clutching arrows. The seal of a unit most of these soldiers had never heard of, and those who had prayed never to meet. Whispers slithered through the formation. Nighthawk. His mouth opened, nothing came. For a long, unbearable moment he just stared, pale beneath the hard lines of sunburn. Then he turned abruptly. Inspection dismissed. His voice was low, unsteady. Then louder, you're all dismissed. Return to assignments. No one moved at first. Then slowly the formation broke, eyes darting back at her. Mac, her blouse, expression flat, she gave them nothing. Barked with me. Inside his office, blinds drawn, fan buzzing, he finally spoke. You weren't supposed to be here. I was assigned here. By who? You know I can't say. And that tattoo. Her voice barely shifted, earned it. He exhaled sharp. I've read about Nighthawk, enough to know the kind of hell you had to survive. You could said something. You didn't ask. His glare held longer this time, but behind it flickered something new. Not admiration, not yet. Respect, reluctant and heavy. You stirred a storm you don't even see, he muttered. She met his gaze. I didn't stir it, you did. That night in the barracks, someone had scrubbed off the chalk insult scrawled across her door earlier in the week. The laughter had gone quiet. The whispers remained, but they carried something else now. Caution, curiosity, fear. At the mess hall, someone muttered, probably just a biker shop tattoo. No one laughed. The silence had weight. Later, Sergeant Miller passed her outside the armory. He didn't smirk, didn't bark, just gave a stiff nod, almost respectful. She nodded back, then walked on. Her secret was no longer secret. The ink on her skin had spoken louder than any words could. But in the still hours before dawn, as she laced her boots and listened to the quiet before the bass roared awake, one truth pressed harder than the heat or the judgment. The storm wasn't over. It had only begun. Why did he call another assembly so soon? The order came late in the day, unusual and deliberate. Every soldier was to report at 1800 hours, dress uniforms, parade ground. No warning, no explanation. Soldiers traded uneasy looks. 2 assemblies in a week. That meant theater, not training. And theater meant someone was about to be made an example. Mac already knew who. She stood in formation as the sun bled into the horizon, cap square, boots gleaming, face unreadable. Around her, 180 men shifted in the growing twilight, whispering just low enough to stay out of earshot. None of them laughed now. The tattoo had killed that, but tension still clung to every breath. Colonel appeared with the command staff, clipboard in hand. His voice carried easily across the silence. This unit has long stood on discipline, on order, on example. There are standards to uphold. Uniform integrity is not optional. His tone was sharper than the first inspection, words measured, building rhythm like a sermon. Some soldiers arrive with unusual backgrounds. They may think themselves exempt from review, but we do not play favorites here. We correct everyone, publicly if necessary. Then his finger lifted toward her. Step forward, Lieutenant. Mac obeyed without hesitation. Her posture was precise, her gaze fixed. "This is the same soldier who removed her combat blouse earlier this week," continued, packing slowly in front of her. "While some of you might be enchanted by stories or inked fairy tales, I care about regulation. Remove your blouse. Regulation check." The order cracked like thunder. This wasn't inspection. This was escalation. He was pushing her again, harder, daring her to disobey. If she refused, she'd break protocol. If she, the tattoo, would be exposed a second time, this time beneath the fatting light, witnessed by every man who had once dismissed her. Either way, he thought, she would fracture. But she didn't. Wordless, Mac unbuttoned her blouse, each movement steady. She folded it over her arm, her undershirt pressed crisp against her skin. The eagle tattoo glared out at the crowd, undeniable in the twilight glow. A ripple went through the soldiers. Even those who doubted before no longer could. Stopped packing. He stared at the ink again as if trying to will it away. His voice hardened. "She wears a mark not listed in her file, a mark associated with a program that does not exist." The silence was knife-sharp. Then from the back a voice broke it, gravelly, certain. "It exists." Heads turned. Master Sergeant Frank stepped forward. 68 years old, his face leathered by decades of war, his posture still straight. The soldiers shifted, startled, rarely spoke, never interrupted. He rolled his sleeve, just far enough to reveal the faded edge of the same eagle tattoo, by time. "I last saw that ink in Mogadishu, '93, he said, voice carrying the weight of unshakable memory. "We lost 7 men before. One of them bore that bird. They got us out anyway." His gaze locked on Mac. "She didn't steal that ink." The formation murmured, whispers skittering like wind over dry leaves. His composure faltered. "I didn't authorize this." "No one authorizes Nighthawk," answered steady. "That's the point." The colonel's jaw tightened. He snapped the only words he had left. "Dismissed." But the damage was done. Mac buttoned her blouse again, each motion deliberate, and walked back to formation. Not one soldier spoke. Not one dared. She had not shouted. She had not defended herself. She had simply stood still, and the silence itself had carried the truth. That night she lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling. She did not feel victorious. She felt tired. Exposing the tattoo was never her plan, and now it was out. The secret she had carried like a scar had been forced into daylight. It changed everything. It meant scrutiny, suspicion, danger. But what it meant most of all was that she could no longer walk unnoticed. The next day the base buzzed. Whispers moved faster than orders. Soldiers no longer asked if the tattoo was real. They debated what it meant. At the range, eyes lingered longer. During drills, nods replaced smirks. Some men stepped aside when she passed. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Even Miller, once her loudest skeptic, now seemed uneasy, watching her with an expression she couldn't yet read. Respect, distrust, fear. It didn't matter. She gave them none of herself. Not a word, not a smile. Silence became her shield. But silence could not stop the questions clawing inside her own chest. What had she become here? A leader? A ghost? A weapon? Or just a reminder of something the army itself had tried to bury? Late one night, a pair of soldiers sat by the fire pit, voices hushed as she walked past. "I thought Nighthawk was disbanded." "It was." "Then how the hell does she have the mark?" "She didn't deny it, did she?" Their words followed her into the shadows. She didn't turn, didn't break stride, but the truth was sharper than their doubts. She hadn't it because denial was pointless. The ink wasn't rumor, it was proof, and proof, once shown, never goes back to silence. 2 days later, the whispers still hadn't faded, and though quiet in his judgment, hadn't forgotten either. She could feel it when his eyes followed her across the field. Like a man staring at a ghost he wished he'd never summoned. And then came the journalist. He arrived on a Tuesday, badge dangling, smile too practiced. Wells claimed he was writing a feature on elite training units, shadowing soldiers, capturing daily life. But Mac noticed the way he lingered near her platoon, the way his gaze followed her, the way his questions never fit the story he said he was writing. That night outside the motor pool, he cornered her. "Lieutenant," he said smoothly, "do you have a moment?" She kept walking. "I've heard remarkable stories," he pressed. "Some even say you were part of—" "I was never part of anything worth printing," she cut him off, voice sharp, clipped. He smiled like he expected that answer. "That's what makes it worth printing." Her jaw tightened. "Good night, Mr. Wells." But as she walked away, her thoughts churned. His tone, his eyes, he wasn't just chasing a story. He was digging, and if he kept digging, he would unearth more than her tattoo. He would unearth the shadows themselves. That week during a combat simulation, Miller hesitated under pressure. The scenario collapsed. She stepped in without pause, reordered the team, cut a path through the ridge, flanked the enemy squad. Hostages secured in under 7 minutes. Observers clapped, but he didn't look away either. When it ended, the men who once mocked her now slapped her back. And that night, a note appeared pinned to her locker. No signature, just 6 words written in a rough hand. "We believe you earned it. Prove why they feared it." She didn't smile, she didn't need to. But alone, in the quiet of her room, she brushed her fingers over her shoulder. Over the eagle inked into her skin, and the truth returned like a whisper she had tried to bury. Nighthawk was never just about survival, it was about silence, the kind that spoke louder than words. The kind that was beginning to speak for her now. Why had the air changed? Not the heat. Texas still pressed heavy, the dust still clung to uniforms, the drills still cracked across the parade ground like thunder. But something else had shifted, something you couldn't measure in steps or scores. Soldiers who once sneered now nodded stiffly. The same men who had mocked her arrival now avoided her eyes, as though they feared what they might see reflected back. Lieutenant didn't acknowledge it. She ran harder, drilled longer, sharpened every edge of herself until sweat burned her skin raw. Respect born from whispers meant nothing. She wanted results, discipline, the kind of cohesion that didn't crack under fire. And yet she couldn't ignore it entirely. Silence had replaced laughter, caution had replaced mockery. Even Sergeant Miller, once her loudest critic, now hovered close but quiet, as if waiting for her to stumble or prove him wrong again. But silence was fragile, and Wells had come to break it. He hovered at the edges of training fields, his notebook always out, his camera always ready. He spoke with soldiers when he thought no one noticed. He wrote too much, asked too many questions, and always his gaze slid back to her. That evening he approached her again outside the barracks. The sun was sinking, shadows long across the gravel. "Lieutenant," he called, his voice smooth, calculated. She stopped but didn't turn. "Men talk, you know," he continued, stepping closer. "They talk about your mark, about what it means, Nighthawk." Her shoulders stiffened. The name wasn't supposed to live outside whispers, let alone past the lips of a stranger. "You've been listening too closely," she said flatly. "That's my job," he smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "I collect stories. Some stories were never meant to be told." "Or maybe," he countered softly, "they were meant to be told by the right person." Her gaze cut to him finally, sharp enough to slice through his polished calm. "Not you." She walked past him without another word. But his words lingered. Stories, secrets, shadows. He wasn't just a journalist. He knew too much. Too precise, too sharp, his curiosity threaded with the kind of knowledge no civilian should have. That night she dreamed of her father, the same dream that had haunted her since she was a cadet. A storm in the desert, sand whipping so hard it cut the skin. Men shouting, radios dead. Her father's hand on her shoulder, voice calm even as chaos raged. "You don't run from the storm, Mac. You become it." She woke with the echo of his words and the burn of her tattoo, pulse steady but chest heavy. The next day, training drills turned into something more dangerous. Had ordered a complex hostage scenario, the kind that tested not just tactics but leadership under fire. Miller's team faltered, trapped by crossfire. Confusion spread. Mac moved instinctively, cutting through the hesitation like a blade. Second team, flank left. Suppression fire on my mark now. Her voice carried without shouting, sharp and certain. Soldiers who once doubted her followed without pause. The scenario flipped in minutes. Hostages secured, enemy contained. Observers clapped again, a rare breach of discipline. Didn't, but his jaw tightened, his stare locked on her longer than usual, not with anger, with calculation. That evening, Mac returned to her barracks to find a note pinned to her locker again. Same rough handwriting. Prove why they feared it. She folded it silently and slid it into her pocket. She didn't need to wonder who wrote it. It didn't matter. What mattered was that even here, inside the supposed order of Fort Hawkins, the shadows had begun to whisper again. And whispers had a way of spreading. The next assembly came unannounced, called by, no reason given, just another gathering at dusk, parade ground lined with uneasy men. The colonel's speech was short this time, almost clipped. Words about order, about regulation, about how no soldier was exempt from scrutiny, but his eyes never left her. "Lieutenant," he called again, "step forward." The crowd tensed, not again. She stepped out, calm, precise. "This soldier," said, "has a mark not listed in her file, a mark tied to a program that doesn't exist." Gasps, whispers. The tattoo, once rumor, was now public declaration. He wanted to strip the mystery bare, force it into daylight where it could shrivel. But before he could say more, a voice cut through the tension. "Sir, with respect, it exists." It was again. His sleeve rolled, his own faded ink visible. "Some of us have bled under it, some of us still carry it." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Soldiers looked from Mac to Tu, searching for truth. His face paled, but his voice stayed sharp. "Dismissed." No one moved. Then louder, harder, "Dismissed." The formation broke reluctantly, whispers trailing like smoke. That night Mac lay awake again. She hadn't asked for this. Exposure, spectacle, judgment, none of it was her choice. But choices were rarely hers. In the shadows where she had earned the eagle, choice was a luxury stripped away long before the mission began. You didn't choose survival. You earned it or you didn't. The tattoo burned again, a reminder and a warning. By morning, the whispers were louder than orders. Wells's questions sharper than ever. Soldiers passed glances like contraband. And in the command building, silence carried weight heavier than any reprimand. Something was building. She could feel it in the stillness before the drills, in the sidelong looks, in the restless air that hummed with a question none of them dared ask aloud. What was she really? And what storm was coming for all of them now that the shadows had been stirred awake? Why was he still here? Most journalists didn't last long on bases like Fort Hawkins. They took their staged photos, jotted down a few quotes, then moved on to safer stories. But Wells lingered. He shadowed drills he had no clearance to observe. He asked questions that cut too close to nerves. And when he smiled, it was never curiosity, it was calculation. Mac noticed the way soldiers began to avoid him. They gave him half answers, shrugged him off, stared at the ground. But Wells wasn't interested in them. His eyes tracked only her. She kept her silence. Ignoring him was safer than engaging. Yet silence had its own danger. The more she gave him nothing, the more he seemed convinced she was hiding everything. That evening, as she left the mess hall, he appeared at her side like a shadow. "Lieutenant," he said smoothly, "you must know your story doesn't fit here. Soldiers talk. They whisper about things that shouldn't exist. Nighthawk." Her jaw tightened. "You've built quite the legend in a very short time. But legends don't survive inspection, do they? They collapse under light." She stopped, turned to face him fully for the first time. Her voice was steady, low. "Do you want advice, Mr. Wells?" He raised an eyebrow. "Stop digging. Some truths aren't buried. They're chained. And if you break the chain, you won't survive what comes out. His smile faltered just enough for her to see it, but then it returned, thinner than before. That sounds less like a warning and more like a confession. She walked away before he could press further. That night she sat at her desk in the barracks, the photo of her father catching the glow of the desk lamp. His uniform gleamed in the picture, his eyes sharp with the same calm defiance she carried now. She traced the corner of the frame with her thumb. He had known about secrets like this. He had lived and died under their weight. The tattoo burned again, not with shame but with reminder. She had carried the silence for years, but now the silence was cracking, and once it cracked, it never sealed again. The following week, drills intensified, pushed the unit harder, longer, in heat that dropped men to their knees. He rarely addressed her directly, but his eyes followed her through every course, every maneuver, as though waiting for her to fail. She didn't. If anything, she thrived, and that only deepened his silence. But the men noticed. By the third week, her presence had transformed from anomaly to gravity. Soldiers aligned with her rhythm, fell in step behind her pace, matched her precision. Not out of command, out of something else. Belief. That was dangerous. Belief drew attention, and attention drew predators. The predators came quietly at first. One night, returning from late drills, she found a folded note under her door. Different handwriting this time, sharper, cleaner. Stormbird, he remembers. Her blood chilled. Stormbird, her old code name. That name wasn't in files. It wasn't on rosters. It wasn't supposed to exist outside the handful of ghosts who had whispered it in the dark. Whoever had left the note wasn't a curious journalist. They were something else. She burned the note in her trash can, watching the words curl and blacken. But the message still burned in her chest long after the ashes had cooled. The next morning called her into his office. Blinds drawn, fan buzzing, desk spotless as always. He didn't look at her immediately. "I've been making calls," he said finally. "Back channels, friends who still answer when I press. You're not in any active registry, no transfer logs, no debriefs, nothing." "That's how it works," she said evenly. His eyes lifted, sharp, searching. "So you're telling me you ran ops so black that even top brass couldn't see the paper trail?" "I'm not telling you anything, sir, because I'm not supposed to." He studied her for a long moment, his voice lowered. "Do you know what kind of storm you've stirred here?" "You stirred it," she replied calmly. His jaw tightened, but she saw it, the flicker of respect he didn't want to admit. "Dismissed," he muttered, though it sounded more like surrender than order. She saluted, turned, and left. Outside, the stairs felt heavier than ever. Soldiers looked at her now, not with mockery, not with curiosity, but with unease. She wasn't just a woman in their ranks anymore. She was something else, something they didn't have a name for. That night she passed the fire pit again. A group of younger soldiers whispered as she walked by. One of them leaned close to another. "She's not here to train, she's here to test us." The words clung to her as she disappeared into the shadows. They weren't wrong. 2 days later, Wells appeared again. This time he didn't smile. His voice was lower, more direct. "I know about B grade," he said quietly, falling into step beside her. "The embassy extraction, 2004. 7 operators, 3 days, no support. The mission that never existed." She froze mid-step. Her pulse thudded once hard. No one should have known about B grade, not even most of Nighthawk. She turned slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you really?" His smile returned, brittle. "Someone who believes the American people deserve to know what's done in their name, even if it gets good people killed." Before she could respond, appeared with 2 MPs at his back. His voice cracked like a rifle shot. "Mr. Wells, your credentials have been revoked. You'll be escorted off base immediately." Wells didn't resist, but as he passed her, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "This isn't over, Storm." The code name hit her like a blade to the gut. She held her composure until he was gone. Only then did she let the weight settle. No one should have known that name. That night summoned her into his office. Blinds down, the air tense with something darker than secrecy. "Wells isn't a journalist," said flatly. "Ex-CIA, discharged in '08, reason classified." Frowned, then why the act? "Because he wasn't here for a story," Max said quietly. "He was here for me." Slid a file across the desk. Inside, a photograph. A face above the left eye, nose broken, eyes cold. Max's chest tightened. "Alexander," she whispered. Looked between them. "Who the hell is that?" "Serbian intelligence," said grimly. "Specialized in counterops against Western forces. Ruthless. Efficient." Max's eyes didn't waver from the photo. "I crossed paths with him once. B-grade, he didn't walk away happy. Then he's been hunting you ever since, finished. And now he's using Wells to find you." Silence filled the room, heavy as the storm pressing on the air outside. "They're not after a story," Max said finally. "They're after blood." And as she left the office that night, the weight of it pressed down harder than ever. The tattoo wasn't just a mark anymore. It was a target. The storm her father had warned her about wasn't coming. It was already here. Why were the dogs barking that late? Fort Hawkins slept under the heavy blanket of night, lights dim, drills over, rifles stacked in racks. Soldiers dozed in bunks, some still scribbling letters home, some staring at ceilings in silence. Nothing moved outside the fence but the desert wind. And yet the dogs barked, low at first, then frantic. Max sat up instantly. Years of instinct don't die with reassignment. She laced boots, grabbed her sidearm, and slipped out into the dark. The barking cut sharp against the silence. Guards moved toward the perimeter, flashlights slicing beams across the sand. Then the first explosion tore the night apart. The ground shook. Sirens wailed. Shouts filled the air as men scrambled from bunks, half-dressed, eyes wide with sleep still clinging. Smoke bled from the south fence line, sparks scattering like fireflies. "Incoming," a voice screamed. "South perimeter breach." Mac was already moving. She didn't need orders. She ran toward the chaos, boots hammering gravel, lungs steady, heart ice cold. Shadows spilled through the fence line, figures quick, deliberate, armed. Not amateurs, not raiders, professionals. Gunfire cracked, sharp and controlled. Guards dropped, chaos spread. She dove behind a sandbag wall, drew her weapon, fired once, twice, 3 times. 2 figures fell. Others moved like ghosts, coordinated, disciplined. This wasn't random. This was a message. Soldiers scrambled, some firing wild, some frozen. Miller bellowed orders, but confusion drowned him out. Then Mac's voice cut sharp through the noise. "Form 2 lines, suppress left, cover your flank." Men who had once doubted her snapped into formation. Not because they chose to, because her voice carried something their instincts recognized. Authority. Survival. Rounds tore into the sandbags, spraying dust into her face. She ducked, reloaded, popped up again. Her shots were clean, efficient. No waste. No hesitation. Each one found its mark. Through the smoke she caught a glimpse of a face. Scar above the left eye. Yep. He was here. Her stomach clenched, but her aim didn't falter. She fired toward him, but he ducked back, his men covering his retreat deeper into the compound. He wasn't here to win a firefight. He was here to probe, to test, to send a message. The firefight raged for minutes that felt like hours. Finally, floodlights roared to life, illuminating the perimeter. Reinforcements swarmed. Barked a signal, and his men fell back, vanishing into the night as swiftly as they had come. Silence returned, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the hiss of burning fence wire. Mac lowered her weapon, chest heaving. Around her, soldiers stared, not at the breach, not at the bodies, at her. She had commanded them without permission, and they had obeyed. Stormed onto the field moments later, his face pale, his voice sharp. "Report." Miller tried to speak, but his words faltered. It was Mac who answered, clear and calm. South fence breach, 12 hostiles, well-trained, disciplined, armed with NATO gear. Casualties, 4 wounded, 1 KIA. Enemy when reinforcements arrived. His eyes locked on hers. For a moment, silence stretched heavy. Then he nodded once. Secure the perimeter, double shifts. No one rests until this base is airtight. Men scattered to obey. Later, inside the command building, slammed his fist on the desk. This wasn't random. You know that. I saw your face when you recognized him. Mac said steady, he's alive. And he's after you, snapped. You've dragged a ghost into my command. Her jaw tightened. I didn't drag him here, he followed. Leaned forward, voice low. What does he want, Mac? Her eyes darkened. He doesn't want me dead, not yet. He wants the mark erased. He wants the last Nighthawk buried, and he'll burn every man on this base to do it. Silence, heavy, suffocating. Finally spoke, quieter now. Then we make sure he fails. The next morning the base felt different. The soldiers moved sharper, quieter, their laughter gone. Fear hummed under every step. But when they looked at her now, there was no doubt. Some with awe, some with fear, but none with dismissal. At the range, Miller approached her. His voice was rough but steady. You saved lives last night. I'll remember that. She didn't smile. That doesn't mean they'll trust me. He studied her for a moment. Trust is earned in blood. Last night you bled for them, that counts. His words settled in her chest heavier than bullets. She didn't need their trust. She hadn't come here for it. And yet part of her, the part still human beneath scars and steel, wanted it more than she admitted. That night, alone in her barracks, she cleaned her weapon with steady hands. Each stroke of the cloth felt ritual, each click of metal a reminder. Wasn't done. He had tested the fence. Next time he would test her. Her father's voice returned, echoing in memory. You don't run from the storm, you become it. She set the rifle down, stared at the ink on her shoulder. The eagle's wings seemed sharper in the lamplight, talons clutched. The storm had come to Fort Hawkins. And she would not run. But deep down, beneath the steel, beneath the calm, one truth gnawed quietly. Even storms break. Why did the silence feel heavier than the gunfire? Days had passed since the breach, but the base hadn't recovered. Soldiers still drilled, still ran, still fired rounds at paper targets. But laughter was gone. Conversations were clipped. The air itself seemed brittle, ready to shatter under the slightest pressure. Mac felt it most in the eyes that followed her. Some were steady now, filled with respect carved by the night she had led them through chaos. Others burned with doubt, suspicion, fear. She could almost hear the questions they didn't voice. Why was here? Why her? What storm had followed her through the gates? At the command briefing's voice was sharp, but beneath it Mac heard something new. Not just anger, unease. Security protocols are doubled, every vehicle checked, every shift extended. We will not be caught off guard again. He paused, scanning the room, then let his eyes rest on her longer than anyone else. But make no mistake, this was not an attack on Fort Hawkins. This was an attack on one soldier. Murmurs rippled across the table. Mac didn't flinch. She stared back at him, calm, silent. She wouldn't give the others a single flicker of weakness. Later that night, the first message appeared. A single sheet of paper slipped under her door, typed, clean, no signature. Stormbird, how many ghosts do you carry now? She burned it instantly, but the unease clung like smoke. Wasn't done with bullets. He was inside their walls now, dripping poison into their silence. The next morning, a crate of rifles scheduled for inspection was found tampered with, firing pins removed, serial numbers scratched. An entire squad had trained with useless weapons the day before. Men cursed, demanded answers. And though no proof pointed to her, whispers did. By evening, another note waited at her bunk. They trust you now. How long until they bleed for it? Her pulse stayed steady, her hands calm as she tore it to shreds. But in her chest, the truth gnawed harder. Wasn't just hunting her. He was dismantling the base from inside, one seed of doubt at a time. Miller approached her that night outside the mess hall. His face was drawn, his voice quieter than usual. Men are jumpy. They won't say it outright, but some think you're the reason he's here. I am, she admitted, no hesitation. He's after me, not them. That's not how they see it, Miller muttered. They see fences breached, weapons tampered, and a ghost who shows up right after you do. That's a hell of a shadow to live under. She met his eyes. Then tell them the truth, or they'll drown in their own fear. He studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. Truth's not enough when men are scared. They'll follow fear before they follow reason. And with that he walked away, leaving the words heavy in the air. 2 nights later struck again, not with bullets but with silence. The power grid failed just past midnight. The base plunged into black. Sirens died. Radios hissed static. Soldiers stumbled in the dark, weapons drawn, nerves frayed raw. Mac moved calm, precise, every step muscle memory from nights darker than this. She a group near the armory, her voice steady. Flashlights, pair up, guard the fuel depot. But panic was faster than order. Shouts erupted, boots pounded, someone fired a round into nothing. The bullet ricocheted, grazing a soldier's arm. Blood, confusion, fear. Through it all, Mac caught movement at the edge of the blackout, a figure watching. Their eyes locked for a heartbeat, even across the dark. He smiled once, then slipped away, swallowed by shadow. By dawn, the power returned. The official report listed it as a technical failure, but the men knew better, and the whispers grew sharper. He comes and goes as he pleases, and always she sees him first. That morning, another note waited at her locker. Stormbird, they will break before you do. She clenched it in her fist until her knuckles went white. She didn't burn this one. She kept it, because part of her knew he was right. At the next assembly stood before them, his voice clipped harsh. We are under siege, not by an army, not by insurgents, but by one man, and we will not break. Then his gaze turned to her, sharp as a blade. Lieutenant, front. She stepped forward, posture perfect, face unreadable. This base whispers of your past, of your mark. Tell them now, what is Nighthawk? The silence was suffocating. 180 men stared, waiting, some with hope, some with suspicion. Mac let the pause stretch, then spoke softly. Nighthawk was not a unit, it was a graveyard. We were sent where no one else was meant to survive. We weren't heroes. We weren't even soldiers in the eyes of the brass. We were shadows, and shadows don't get medals, they get buried. Her words hung in the air, raw and heavy. No one spoke. Finally she added, I earned this mark, and every scar that came with it. Knows that. That's why he's here. Not for you, for me. But I won't run, and I won't let him bury any of you for his war with me. For a moment silence held, then stepped forward, sleeve rolled, his own faded eagle visible. His voice cracked with age but carried with force. She's telling you the truth. Men like don't hunt the weak. They hunt storms. And if she's standing here, it means she's survived storms none of us could imagine. The silence broke, not into cheers, not into applause, but into something heavier. Belief. Uneasy, fragile, but real. That night she sat alone, staring at the tattoo in the mirror. For the first time, she felt the weight not just of survival, but of expectation. These men were looking at her now not as an outcast, not as a ghost, but as something else. A shield. But a shield breaks too. As she turned away, another note waited on her bunk. She hadn't heard anyone enter. She hadn't seen a shadow move. But the note was there. Stormbird, tomorrow the shield shatters. Her chest tightened, not with fear, with certainty. Wasn't circling anymore. He was coming. Why did the night feel too quiet? Even under double shifts, even with spotlights sweeping the perimeter, something in the air was wrong. Too still, too heavy. Soldiers felt it. They moved sharper, eyes flicking toward shadows, rifles gripped than usual. Mac felt it too. She stood on the catwalk above the motor pool, scanning the desert horizon. The moonlight washed everything pale, almost clean, but she knew better. Clean skis hid storms. The first shot cracked just past midnight. It wasn't at the fence this time. It came from inside. A guard dropped from the tower, blood spraying as the alarm split the silence. Chaos erupted instantly, shouts, boots pounding gravel, floodlights flaring. But by the time men turned, black-clad figures were already moving through the base. Was inside. Max sprinted down the catwalk, landing hard on the gravel. Bullets tore past, sparks flying from the motor pool's steel siding. She slid behind a Humvee, drew her weapon, and scanned. Shadows moved with precision. Not raiders, not chaos, professionals. Her pulse stayed steady. "Miller," she barked as he stumbled out of the barracks with half his men. "Rally left, flank their entry. Fuel depot now." Orders snapped out of her like second nature, sharper than panic, faster than thought. Men moved. They didn't question. Gunfire tore through the night. Grenades flashed, throwing sand and fire across the compound. Soldiers scrambled for cover. Mac vaulted the hood of the Humvee, rolled, came up firing. 2 hostiles dropped. Another ducked behind the supply shed. She moved fast, no hesitation, her breath even, her body locked into a rhythm carved years ago in places no one dared speak of. Then she saw him. Yep. Standing in the open, calm, his scar glinting in the floodlight. He didn't fire. He just watched her, lips curling into a faint smile. Then he raised a hand and his men pressed harder. The fight turned brutal. Close quarters. Metal clanging, boots thudding, fists breaking jaws when ammo ran low. Max slammed one attacker into a wall, knife flashing, clean and efficient. She felt no thrill, no anger, just the cold necessity of survival. But around her, chaos wasn't so precise. A grenade exploded near the barracks, the shockwave throwing Miller hard against the ground. He groaned, blood streaking his temple. "Miller," she shouted, dragging him behind cover. His eyes fluttered open, dazed. "Still breathing," he muttered through grit teeth. "Stay that way," she snapped, then turned, firing again. The battle raged for what felt like hours but could only have been minutes. Men pressed deep into the base, reaching the command building. Barked orders from inside, his voice strained but unbroken. Squad held the fuel depot, refusing to let it fall. But slowly, deliberately, the attackers pushed toward one place, her. She realized it then. The attack wasn't about the base. It wasn't even about proving his strength. It was about drawing her out, isolating her, breaking her in front of the men. She wouldn't give him that. "Fall back to the armory," she ordered, voice cutting through the chaos. "Tighten ranks, lock shields." Men obeyed, forming lines, pushing together instead of scattering. Gunfire slowed, controlled volleys replacing wild bursts. For the first time, the tide shifted. Hostiles began to fall back. But stayed. He stepped forward through the smoke, rifle lowered, eyes locked on hers. And for a moment the battlefield stilled. "Stormbird," he called, his accent sharp, cutting across the chaos. "Still carrying ghosts." Her grip tightened on her rifle. She didn't answer. He smiled thinly. "How many will die before you admit what you are? You're not their leader, you're their curse." Men heard him. She saw it in their eyes, fear flickering, doubt clawing at belief. Wasn't just fighting with bullets. He was carving into their trust with words sharper than knives. She stepped forward, calm, every movement deliberate. Her voice was steady, clear, carrying across the battlefield. "You think I'm their curse? You're wrong, I'm their storm, and storms don't break, they bury." She raised her rifle and fired. The shot missed him by inches as he ducked back, his men laying down cover fire. But the words had landed. Soldiers, shouts rising as they pressed harder, driving the attackers back toward the fence. Minutes later, signaled retreat. Smoke grenades hissed, covering their exit. Just like before, he vanished into the night, leaving bodies behind, leaving silence heavy and broken. When it was over, the base lay, barracks shattered, vehicles burning, soldiers bleeding. But it still stood. Mac stood in the center of it, chest heaving, rifle heavy in her hands. Around her, men gathered, their faces pale, their eyes wide. And slowly they looked at her, not with suspicion, not with doubt, but with something harder, something closer to belief. Miller, blood still streaking his face, managed a broken laugh. Hell of a curse, huh? She didn't smile. She didn't answer. She just looked back toward the horizon where it had vanished again. He wasn't gone. He had tested the walls, tested the men, tested her, and next time he wouldn't retreat. That night, as medics worked and flames dimmed, she sat alone by the edge of the barracks. Her hands shook now, not from fear, but from the weight pressing harder than ever. Every order she gave tonight had saved lives, but every bullet had fired had been meant for her. The men didn't say it, but she saw it in their faces. They knew it now. This wasn't their war, it was hers. She traced the tattoo on her shoulder, the eagle ink dark against her skin. Her father's voice returned, soft, unyielding. You don't run from the storm, you become it. She whispered into the night, barely audible, I am the storm. But deep inside she felt it. Storms don't last forever. Why did the dawn feel like a warning? The desert sky was clear, a soft wash of pale blue spilling across Fort Hawkins. The air was still, too still. Soldiers moved with mechanical precision, repairing the damage from the night before, patching fences, stacking sandbags, hauling debris. Their faces were drawn, their voices muted. Mac walked the perimeter in silence. Every step felt heavier than the last. She could feel it in her bones, in the quiet hum under her skin. Wasn't finished. Last night wasn't the storm. It was the lightning before it. And then the note appeared again, slipped under her door, folded with the same cold precision. Stormbird, tonight the sky falls. She didn't burn this one either. She tucked it into her pocket, her jaw set. All day she felt the tension building. Radios crackled with false alarms, a shadow at the fence, a truck backfiring on the highway, a drone glitching mid-flight. Soldiers jumped at every sound. By evening, Evan's voice was frayed as he ordered triple shifts. At dusk, Max stood on the catwalk again, staring at the horizon. Joined her, his old hand steady on the railing. You know he's not after them, said softly. I know. Then why stay? She exhaled slowly, the weight pressing on her chest. Because storms don't run. He studied her, then nodded once. Then don't run, but don't carry it alone either. She didn't answer, she couldn't. The night came fast, too fast. The base lights hummed, the desert quiet, and then the silence broke. Mortars screamed from the dark, explosions tearing into the north wall. The ground shook, sirens wailed, soldiers scrambled, shouting, weapons drawn. Had come. This time there was no probing, no testing. His men surged in waves, heavier than before, armed with heavier weapons, moving with brutal precision. Explosions rocked the barracks, fire leaping into the sky. Mac was already moving, barking orders, pulling men into formation. Left flank suppress. Hold the depot. Miller take the tower, cut their line of sight. The night lit with fire and thunder. Soldiers fought, shouts raw, rifles hammering the dark. The air filled with smoke, blood, chaos. Through it all she saw him, moving like the storm's eye, calm, steady, untouchable. Every order he gave cut like a blade, every step bringing him closer to her. Mac fought her way through the chaos, each shot clean, each movement sharp. She reached the center of the compound just as stepped through the smoke. For the first time, they faced each other without cover. Stormbird, he said, voice cutting through the fire, finally. Her rifle was steady, her voice low. This ends tonight. He smiled faintly. Yes, but not how you think. The fight exploded around them. His men pressed harder, forcing hers back. Mac fired, ducked, rolled. Moved with brutal precision, his shots grazing clothes, his blade flashing once, twice. Their fight was close now, too close. He lunged, knife catching her shoulder. Pain seared, but she twisted, slammed her elbow into his jaw, forcing him back. Blood streaked her arm, but her grip didn't falter. "You carry ghosts," he hissed. "You think they make you strong, but they break you." She locked eyes with him, voice steady even through the pain. "They don't break me, they keep me standing." She drove forward, a surge of raw force, knocking his blade wide, pressing her rifle against his chest. For a heartbeat, silence hung. Then the shot cracked. Staggered, eyes wide, blood blooming across his vest. He dropped to his knees, breath ragged, the scar on his face twitching as he tried to smile. "Stormbird," he rasped, voice faint. "Even storms fade." He collapsed still. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the fatting gunfire. His men faltered, then scattered, retreating into the night without their commander. The base was broken, burning, bodies scattered across the gravel, but it stood. Mac stood in the center, chest heaving, blood soaking her sleeve. Around her, soldiers gathered slowly, their faces pale, their eyes wide. And then, one by one, they saluted, not out of order, out of choice. For the first time, she let herself breathe. Later, as dawn broke again over Fort Hawkins, she sat by the edge of the field, staring at the horizon. The desert stretched endless, the sky pale and fragile. Her arm ached, her body throbbed, but her mind was steady. Joined her, lowering himself beside her with a groan. "It's done," he said quietly. "For now," she murmured. He looked at her, his weathered eyes softer. "You gave them something last night. More than survival, you gave them belief." She shook her head slowly. "I gave them nothing. They earned it themselves." He didn't argue. He just sat with her in silence, the dawn washing them both in gold. Later, she returned to her barracks. She peeled back her sleeve, staring at the eagle inked into her skin. The wings stretched wide, the talons sharp, the mark that had cursed and saved her all the same. Her father's words echoed one last time. "You don't run from the storm, you become it." She whispered softly, her voice barely audible in the empty room. "Storms fade, but what they leave behind, that's what matters." She rolled down her sleeve, stood tall, and walked back into the light. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.